The idea that God is immutable, unchanging in essence and nature, is a fundamental concept in many religious and philosophical traditions. This immutability suggests that the principles governing the universe remain constant and are reflections of the divine nature. If God does not change, then the patterns, laws, and phenomena we observe in reality today are a testament to the divine actions and principles of the past. By studying the natural world and the consistent patterns within it, we can infer much about how God operated in earlier times, even before modern technologies were developed to document and analyze these phenomena. God's immutability is often regarded as the foundation of order and consistency in the universe. Without this divine constancy, chaos would ensue. The unchanging laws of nature, consistent across time and space, serve as a reflection of God's eternal and unalterable nature. By studying the natural laws and the world around us, we gain profound insight into how God interacts with creation, revealing a divine constancy that bridges the past, present, and future. This perspective allows us to analyze present phenomena and draw parallels to historical events. For instance, miraculous abilities, such as healing, heightened perception, or levitation, when viewed through the lens of divine immutability, suggest that similar occurrences in the past adhere to the same unchanging principles governing the universe. Preservation of scriptures. If God's nature is unchanging and God's principles are consistent across time, then it stands to reason that how God interacted with humanity in the past reflects how God interacts now and will in the future. This principle can be applied to the question of the preservation of the Quran. By examining the historical evidence of human involvement in the transmission and editing of scriptures, one can argue that if the Bible was subject to human errors and edits, the same principle would apply to the Quran. This is particularly significant since the Quran attributes its origin to the same God as the Bible, Quran 5:46, 287. The principle of divine immutability challenges the claim of the Quran's perfect preservation. If God did not intervene to preserve the Bible from human error, why would God act differently with the Quran? An unchanging God would not favor one scripture over another in matters of preservation. Historical evidence reveals the Bible's text was influenced by human scribes and editors, reflecting a natural process of transmission. By extension, it is reasonable to infer that the Quran, attributed to the same God, would also be subject to similar human involvement. This perspective challenges the idea of divine intervention solely for the Quran and invites critical reflection on the consistency of God's nature and actions. Ongoing inspiration and revelation. If God's nature is truly unchanging and inspired people to convey the divine message during the time of Jesus, it follows that God would continue to inspire humanity today, especially amidst widespread confusion and conflicting beliefs. The principle behind this inspiration was not limited to a single era but was a consistent response to humanity's need for divine guidance. The current age is arguably one of the most confusing and fragmented in history, marked by conflicting ideologies, religious disputes, and existential challenges such as climate change, inequality, and technological disruption. In this chaos, the need for clarity, moral direction, and spiritual grounding is as great, if not greater, than in the past. For God to remain consistent with God's nature, He would continue to inspire individuals to address the evolving challenges of humanity. Just as God inspired prophets, writers, and teachers in ancient times, He would raise up voices today to guide humanity toward truth, unity, and understanding. Divine inspiration and revelation are not limited to the past, they must continue, and in fact, they are ongoing, as God's guidance remains ever relevant to human needs and circumstances. Some Christian and Muslim leaders argue that divine inspiration ceased with the completion of their sacred texts, Christians asserting the Bible as God's final word, while Muslims hold the Quran occupies this role. Yet, this view conflicts with the principle of divine immutability, suggesting an unchanging God would continue to inspire humanity, especially in times of spiritual uncertainty. If God's nature is unchanging, God's willingness to inspire individuals cannot be limited to a specific time or text. Divine guidance, rooted in an unchanging nature, should be continuous, adapting to humanity's evolving circumstances and needs. By refusing to acknowledge the possibility of ongoing inspiration, Abrahamic religions risk reducing God's interaction with humanity to a historical event rather than a continuous, living reality. True inspiration and revelation are not about manipulating failed first-century prophecies to fit modern contexts, a practice that constitutes intellectual and spiritual dishonesty. Instead, they focus on exposing the limitations and inaccuracies within Abrahamic traditions, while guiding humanity toward a more universal spirituality. This broader spiritual framework empowers individuals to cultivate a profound and direct connection with the divine while still alive, transcending dogmatic boundaries. Franz Bardon's teachings on hermetics, magical evocation, and Kabbalah, along with Satya Sai Baba's emphasis on love, selfless service, and personal transformation, offer deep insights for today's world. Both teachings highlight the importance of inner development, divine connection, and the cultivation of wisdom and compassion. Bardon's work provides practical tools for spiritual growth and mastery, while Sai Baba's guidance fosters personal transformation through service and unconditional love. Together, their teachings show that true spirituality is not confined to ancient doctrines or specific traditions, but is a dynamic, evolving journey of self-realization. By embracing these principles, individuals can experience a closer, more meaningful relationship with the divine, grounded in wisdom, compassion, and transformative spiritual practice. Miraculous abilities. If miraculous abilities, cities, were demonstrated by holy men in the past, then it follows that such individuals should exist across different traditions and religions today. This continuity would align with the principle of divine immutability. If God or the universal divine energy bestowed such abilities in the past, it would be consistent for similar phenomena to manifest in the present. This principle provides a framework for evaluating the authenticity of miraculous accounts throughout history, across various religious and cultural traditions. By using modern demonstrations as a benchmark, we can evaluate which miracles from sacred texts could reasonably be considered plausible and which might be more symbolic or fictional. Through careful research, it becomes clear that extraordinary supernatural abilities continue to be demonstrated by individuals in modern times. A well-known figure is Satya Sai Baba, celebrated for his miraculous feats, such as materializing objects, healing the sick, and performing other phenomena that defy conventional understanding. In India, many individuals are known to possess the ability to levitate objects, with similar abilities observed in Ukraine and parts of Africa, where some can levitate themselves. One particularly extraordinary individual is Alex Shimko, who has even demonstrated the ability to fly. Scientifically valid video footage exists that documents these incredible demonstrations. Even more remarkable are the Zangbeto shamans of West Africa, whose abilities further showcase the vast potential of human capabilities. These feats challenge the limitations of modern science and open up new avenues for exploring the depth of human consciousness. As these occurrences defy conventional explanations, they encourage a reconsideration of what is truly possible and suggest that our understanding of human potential may be far from complete. If we accept modern instances of levitation as genuine, it encourages a re-evaluation of similar historical accounts. For instance, the biblical account of Jesus walking on water or the reported levitation feats of Buddhist and Hindu mystics could be viewed in a new light, suggesting that such extraordinary phenomena may have occurred in the past under different cultural and spiritual contexts. On the other hand, certain miracles described in religious texts raise questions about their historical authenticity. For instance, the resurrection of a fully decomposed body, as described in Matthew 27:51-53, has no modern equivalence. While there are documented cases of resurrection shortly after death, these events are fundamentally different from the resurrection of a body that has undergone significant decomposition. The absence of modern examples to support such extraordinary claims makes it increasingly plausible to interpret these ancient accounts as symbolic or fictional, rather than literal historical events. Resurrection demonstrations of freshly deceased animals, such as fish and rabbits, have been observed in modern times. These individuals have a deep understanding of what is ultimately possible. By comparing present-day occurrences with past supernatural phenomena, we can more effectively assess their plausibility. If no modern individual can demonstrate a miraculous ability, such as raising a fully decomposed body, it weakens the argument that such events actually took place in history. The absence of contemporary evidence to support these extraordinary claims raises doubts about their authenticity. In the absence of modern parallels or verifiable instances, it becomes more reasonable to categorize these stories as symbolic or fictional, rather than treating them as literal historical events. Divine intervention. The principle of consistency and divine action across time and traditions invites us to evaluate claims of past divine intervention in light of present realities. If a just and benevolent divine force did intervene directly in human affairs, without God men as intermediaries, to protect the innocent or uphold righteousness during historical events, we would expect such intervention to occur in modern times, particularly during catastrophic events of mass suffering. However, the absence of observable divine intervention in modern conflicts, such as the U.S. invasion of Iraq, which claimed 2 million lives, World War I and II, with over 70 million deaths, or the Holocaust, raises doubts about similar claims from the past. If the same divine force governs reality today as it did in the past, then its actions, or lack thereof, should reflect a consistent nature. The absence of divine intervention in modern atrocities raises serious doubts about the literal truth of similar claims from the past. When we compare historical accounts of miraculous divine actions to modern events, such as wars, genocides, and humanitarian crises, we find a striking absence of comparable interventions today. The lack of observable divine action during events like world wars or genocides challenges the credibility of historical claims and suggests that these accounts may have been fictionalized or symbolic rather than literal. By examining both historical and contemporary contexts, it becomes increasingly plausible that these stories were constructed to serve cultural or ideological purposes rather than to document factual events. The truth is that God does not intervene directly in human affairs, rather, it is through God-men that such intervention occurs. This prompts a re-evaluation of the biblical accounts of God's intervention on behalf of the Israelites or Jews. The Holocaust, which resulted in the systematic murder of millions of Jews during World War II, stands in stark contrast to the biblical narrative of a God who intervenes to protect and favor the Jewish people. The horrific events of the Holocaust challenge the traditional understanding of God's intervention. The absence of divine intervention during this modern atrocity casts doubt on the literal truth of stories that claim divine favoritism and protection in the past. If the God of the Bible once parted the Red Sea to deliver the Israelites from Egypt, why did this same God not act to save millions from the gas chambers and mass executions? If God sent manna to sustain the Israelites in the desert, why did this same divine care not manifest to protect starving victims in concentration camps? If God destroyed armies threatening the Israelites in biblical battles, why were the Nazis allowed to carry out their atrocities unchecked? The Holocaust demonstrates that, even in moments of dire need, there was no supernatural intervention to protect the Jewish people. This harsh reality challenges the notion of divine intervention and casts serious doubt on the literal truth of biblical accounts, suggesting they are fictional rather than historical. Over the past 2,000 years, there has been no divine intervention in major human catastrophes. Events such as the Holocaust, the U.S. invasion of Iraq that resulted in millions of deaths, the 70 million lives lost in World War I and II, the 2 million Vietnamese soldiers and civilians killed in the Vietnam War, and other tragic events in the past, as well as the ongoing Gaza conflict, serve as glaring examples where humanity suffered immensely without any apparent interference from a higher power. If God does not intervene in such extreme instances of suffering, it stands to reason that divine intervention is neither automatic nor direct, suggesting that this is not how the universe operates. Instead, the world seems to be governed by natural laws and the direct consequences of human actions. Whether through war, famine, or environmental destruction, much of the suffering we witness stems from choices and behaviors rooted in human nature. This perspective aligns more closely with the principle of karma, the law of cause and effect, than with the notion of a divine figure intervening to either punish or save. Rather than awaiting divine action, we must confront the reality that our collective decisions shape the future. However, this does not imply that individuals, siddhas, with the ability to stop natural disasters, such as storms or tsunamis, do not exist. In fact, such beings do exist and possess immense spiritual power. Siddhas have intervened in many natural catastrophes as part of their divine mission. Some disasters are allowed to unfold because humanity must learn critical lessons, while others are prevented. For example, the 2004 tsunami was permitted to occur, but since then, similar events have been averted by the intervention of these siddhas. The 2004 catastrophe served as a powerful lesson for humanity, emphasizing the need for better warning systems and disaster preparedness. The most powerful siddhas are not confined to distant realms, they are present both on Earth and in the astral planes, guiding humanity in ways unseen. I can say with absolute certainty that no future divine figure, whether Jesus or Allah, or any other, will do anything beyond or different from what siddhas are already capable of. Judgment miracles in the last 2,000 years, no holy man, regardless of their claims or the traditions surrounding them, has demonstrated the ability to enact judgment on humanity in a manner similar to the descriptions found in the Bible. For instance, no one has gathered vast multitudes of people, separated them into two groups based on judgment, condemned one group to hell, in a burning furnace, rewarded the other materially, heaven, or resurrected decomposed bodies of the dead. These specific acts, fundamental to Christian and Muslim eschatological narratives, have never been observed in human history. What we have observed instead are individuals, often military or political leaders like Hitler, engaging in acts that echo the destructive judgment scenarios found in the Bible and Quran. These tragic events, though human in origin, evoke the apocalyptic imagery often associated with Jesus' judgment. However, if such a judgment were to occur, it would not be divine in nature. Instead, It would be the result of human actions driven by powerful, unseen forces such as deep state operatives and puppet masters. God-men, as divine beings, do not partake in such horrors. Thus, the concept of judgment as described in the Bible and Quran seems more fictional than divine truth. The dangers of end-time myths. The end-time narratives in the Quran and Bible are not just myths but dangerous ones. By promoting the belief that divine intervention will ultimately resolve humanity's problems, these myths encourage passivity and complacency. Why take action to address climate change, end wars, or fight poverty if a divine savior will eventually appear to fix everything? This mindset can lead to disastrous consequences. Inaction in the face of pressing global issues, such as ecological collapse, nuclear proliferation, and systemic inequality, could result in the destruction of humanity. Believing in divine intervention shifts responsibility away from us and places it in the hands of a figure who has not intervened in the past and will not do so in the future. If humanity is to overcome its challenges, we must reject the notion that salvation will come from an external, divine source. The responsibility to alleviate suffering and create a better world lies squarely with us. End-time myths distract humanity from this urgent reality. Waiting for Jesus, Allah, or any other figure to intervene is not only futile but also dangerous. Humanity cannot afford to sit idly by while suffering continues and existential threats loom. Instead, we must come together to address these issues head-on, using our collective wisdom, compassion, and resources. Jesus' Father, and Yahweh are different individuals. In the Old Testament, Yahweh is portrayed as a fearsome figure who demands reverence and unwavering obedience from his followers. Often depicted as a vengeful, his actions reflect a harsh and unforgiving nature. For instance, during the flood, Genesis 6-8, Yahweh wipes out humanity, sparing only Noah, his family, and a select group of animals. The destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, Genesis 19, involves the obliteration of 2 cities, including innocent women and children, as punishment for their wickedness. Further, Yahweh commands the complete annihilation of the Canaanites, Deuteronomy 7:1-2, Joshua 6:21, including civilians, to secure the promised land. Additionally, the plagues of Egypt, Exodus 7-12, and the death of Egypt's firstborn sons further illustrate his harsh nature, with little emphasis on forgiveness or compassion for those outside the chosen people of Israel. In contrast, the New Testament presents Jesus as a radically different figure. In the Gospels, he is portrayed as the embodiment of love, forgiveness, and compassion, exemplifying humility and selfless service. He heals the sick, cares for the poor, and offers forgiveness to those who repent. His teachings emphasize turning the other cheek, loving one's enemies, and extending grace to all people, regardless of their background. The stark differences between the characters of Yahweh and Jesus suggest they cannot be the same being. If God's nature is truly unchanging, then Yahweh's actions in the Old Testament, focused on justice, vengeance, and punishment, are in direct contrast to Jesus' actions in the New Testament, which emphasize mercy, love, and forgiveness. It is inconsistent with the principle of a changeless God to assert that Yahweh, who embodies vengeance and punishment, could simultaneously be Jesus, or the Father of Jesus, who embodies love, compassion, and forgiveness. It suggests a fundamental change in God's interaction with humanity. However, if God's nature is truly unchanging, such a transformation in divine behavior creates a contradiction. It would imply that God's essence has undergone a fundamental change, challenging the core principle of divine immutability and raising questions about theological consistency. From a logical standpoint, if the character of Yahweh in the Old Testament and the character of Jesus in the New Testament are so fundamentally different, it follows that they cannot be the same being. This distinction also challenges the claim that Yahweh is Jesus' Father, as Jesus states, "If you have seen me, you have seen the Father," implying that his Father shares his nature and character. Additionally, this distinction poses a problem for the doctrine of the Trinity, as it reveals observable differences in the nature and actions of Yahweh and Jesus, suggesting they are not co-equal or of the same essence. If God is immutable, unchanging in essence or nature, then having a son poses a logical problem. If the Son did not always exist, then God underwent a change by creating or begetting the Son, contradicting immutability. If it's God's nature to have a son, one could also argue it's God's nature to first have a wife and then a son. This kind of reasoning only leads to absurdities. For God's sake, Christians, let go of the idea of God having a son. If the Son always existed alongside the Father, the terms Father and Son lose meaning, as fatherhood requires precedence, implying dependency or succession. Moreover, Two co-eternal entities undermine the concept of monotheism, making the Father not truly sovereign. According to Islamic theology, if Allah sits on a chair and possesses a pen and book, Quran, this raises theological issues. If these objects always existed, they become eternal alongside Allah, implying partners in existence, which contradicts Tawheed, absolute oneness. If they were created later, this implies change in Allah's nature or actions, violating His immutability. If Allah is not immutable, He cannot be considered God. Some Christians believe Jesus is physically alive in the sky, but this raises another question. Did His nature change when He was born as a baby? If Jesus existed as a spirit before His birth, He must have remained a spirit after His death. Otherwise, God's nature would have changed, which contradicts the idea of divine immutability. Yahweh and Allah are different if God's nature is immutable, as both Christianity and Islam assert. This creates a significant theological issue when comparing Yahweh and Allah. The character and actions of these two figures show notable differences. In the Old Testament, Yahweh is depicted as executing harsh judgments, like the flood and the destruction of cities, often showing wrath and vengeance. In contrast, Muslims argue Allah is merciful, compassionate, and forgiving, even though the Quran does describe Allah executing harsh judgments, such as in the destruction of disbelieving nations. If God's nature cannot change, these differences suggest that Yahweh and Allah are not the same being. A change in nature would imply that God's essence is not immutable, contradicting the idea of a singular, unchanging divine nature. Modern-day prophets. The Quran mentions 25 prophets by name, but according to Hadith, Allah is said to have sent 124,000 prophets throughout history. If divine guidance through prophets was crucial in the past, it logically follows that God would continue sending prophets, especially during times of increasing confusion and division. God's nature is immutable, meaning God's actions and principles remain constant. This challenges the idea of a final prophet, as it contradicts the notion of God's continuous involvement in guiding humanity. Just as divine guidance was deemed necessary in earlier times, it would be reasonable to expect God to send prophets today to address the complexities and challenges the modern world faces. The need for guidance remains just as relevant now as it was in the past, and it is reasonable to expect that God would continue to provide it through prophets. This challenges the Islamic belief in their prophet as the last prophet and raises questions about the notion that prophetic guidance is no longer needed in the contemporary world. The continuation of divine guidance through prophets would align with the idea of a compassionate, ever-present deity, guiding humanity through evolving circumstances. Jesus' death. If Jesus is God and God's nature is immutable, then Jesus must possess an unchanging essence. This immutability implies that, theoretically, Jesus could still be subject to the same vulnerability that allowed for His death, even now. This introduces a significant theological dilemma. If Jesus were to be killed once more, perhaps by the IDF, before fulfilling His role of gathering people for judgment, it would undermine the entire Christian concept of salvation. Christians await the return of Jesus to gather and separate the people of Israel, and any disruption to this timeline would invalidate the hope of salvation that is central to their faith. If Jesus were to return to Israel today, setting aside the question of His historical existence, and carry out what the Gospels describe, gathering the people, judging them, and dividing them into two groups, one destined for freedom and the other for a burning furnace, He would be killed. That is the stark reality of our world. Everything else is fiction or fantasy. The cyclic nature of the physical universe. The concept of God's immutability can be extended to the physical universe, suggesting that the physical universe is cyclical, with neither a beginning nor an end. If the universe emerged from a source or divine origin, often referred to as God, then its emergence must be an inherent aspect of that source's nature, not a result of external reasoning or decision. The existence of the physical universe, with all its complexities, cannot be contingent on arbitrary motivations or one-time events. Instead, it reflects the fundamental and eternal nature of its origin. By exploring this concept, we arrive at the idea that the physical universe operates cyclically, endlessly arising and fading in an infinite, eternal rhythm. The concept of a source or God as the origin of the physical universe presupposes a being or principle that is eternal, infinite, and self-sufficient. If such a source brought the physical universe into being, this act must stem from its very nature rather than any external factors or deliberate reasoning. For a being unbound by time and space, actions such as choosing to create or deciding to end are inherently meaningless. This is because reasoning requires change, deliberation, and causation, concepts incompatible with an eternal and unchanging source. Thus, The emergence of the physical universe is not a calculated act but an expression of the source's essence. Just as fire radiates heat and light without choice, the source inherently generates existence. The unfolding of the physical universe is an inevitable and continuous process arising from the source's nature. The idea of a linear creation, where the physical universe has a definitive beginning and an irreversible end, contradicts the eternal nature of the source. If the source is infinite and timeless, its expressions must also reflect these qualities. A universe that emerges once and vanishes forever would imply a finite aspect to an otherwise infinite source, which is logically inconsistent. Instead, the universe's cyclic nature is more coherent with the timeless essence of its origin. The end of the universe is merely a phase in an eternal process. From the ashes of one universe, another emerges, continuing the cycle indefinitely. This cyclic principle aligns with observable patterns in nature. Cycles of life and death, growth and decay, and renewal are evident in ecosystems, planetary movements, and even human experiences. Just as the seasons turn and the phoenix rises from its ashes, the physical universe must conform to this eternal rhythm. The source is not a being that acts once and ceases, it is a principle of eternal creativity, ensuring the perpetual renewal of existence.
We've known each other many years, but this is the first time you ever came to me for counsel and for help. I can't remember the last time that you invited me to your house for a cup of coffee. But let's be frank, you never wanted my friendship, and you didn't need a friend like me. But now you come to me and you say, Don Corleone, and give me justice. But you don't ask with respect. You don't offer friendship. You don't even think to call me Godfather.
How much shall I pay you?
Bonus. What have I ever done to make you treat me so disrespectfully? If you'd come to me in friendship, then the scum that ruined your daughter would be suffering this very day. And if by chance an honest man like yourself should make enemies, then he would become my enemies. And then they would fear you.
Are you my friend? Godfather?
Good. Someday, and that day may never come, I'll call upon you to do a service for me. But until that day, accept this justice as a gift of my...
This was never about money for us. It was about us against the system. That system that kills the human spirit. We stand for something. To those dead souls inching along the freeways in their metal coffins, we show them that the human spirit is still alive.